have worse news. And the man says, I'm just sitting, and the doctor says, the test results are back, and you have 24 hours to live. And the man says, that's the bad news? What could possibly be worse than that? And the doctor says, I've been trying to call you since yesterday. So I too have bad news and worse news. The bad news is you have to sit and listen to me for 20 minutes, or 1919 to be specific. The even worse news is it is a Jewish 20 minutes. We could be here all day. They are now passing out survival kits in the galleys if you want to pick one up. My friends, I had a canned speech in my brain that I have now shelved in light of Professor Richard Dawkins' comments. He had to catch a plane, so he's not even going to hear my comments, but no doubt you will relate them to him for me. Professor Dawkins and I had a series of debates on religion and evolution, God and evolution at the University of Oxford when I was the rabbi there from 1988 to 1999. He has since become the world's most famous atheist. Million-copy bestseller. God. So there is a God after all. Look at that. I'm in the wrong profession. And I wanted to say to Richard Dawkins, I mean, one of the great refutations of everything he said is that can a random series of evolutionary accidents create someone as smart as Richard Dawkins? And I would have patronized him and refuted him simultaneously. Because how can you argue with that? No, actually, it could have happened. This is my question. Richard Dawkins said 3 or 4 things, and I'll chart them in the order that he said them. The first was that he has a problem with religion because it's not true. He doesn't care how much benefit it brings to society, because if it's a lie, then why live a lie? Fair enough. But why does he have such a problem with religion? How many other lies does he live that don't bother him at all, even though they seem at times to have a social function? Let me give you an example. He lives in a country called England. And this country is part of the British Commonwealth. And on the dollar bills that are in your pockets, there's a picture of the Queen. Is it true that some people are born royal and some are born only ordinary? Does anyone here want to raise their hand and say, I believe that some are born much more special than others? Is it true that you should live in a castle or in a palace that you haven't worked for? Anyone want to raise their hand for that? Or don't we live in an egalitarian society that utterly refutes the entire belief in a royal family? But he hasn't attacked the royal family, even though it's not true. It's a tradition. But that tradition doesn't bother him. What about family? What about marriage? Richard Dawkins is married. I believe. I certainly knew his wife when I was at Oxford. He and I were friends, actually, and he's actually a very fine man. I wish he were here so I could tell him that. He was always extremely humble and courteous, especially given his fame and renown. And he's a true intellectual. He's never allowed himself to become trite or superficial. Even his arguments today were extremely well presented. But is marriage a true institution? Doesn't evolution say that male nature is to seek the widest possible distribution of the gene pool? Monogamy is a lie. And there's a lot of men who think that monogamy is a type of wood. It's not natural to be monogamous. Don't believe me? Look at the guy to your right. Hopefully he's not your husband. God help me. We know that marriage today doesn't even work. There's a 50% divorce rate in North America. When I was at Oxford, there was a guy who was buried outside of the university. I'm sorry, he and his wife were in a plot outside the university. In 1787, his name was Samuel Dryden, and he actually put on his wife's tombstone, "Here lies my wife. Here let her lie. Now she's at peace, and so am I." Married women are on average, this is statistically accurate, 25% heavier, 25% more body mass than single women. They're seemingly not as happy. And the reason? Because the single woman comes home, checks what's in the fridge, and then she goes to bed. But the married woman comes home, and she checks what's in the bed. even finish that. In fact, if the whole purpose of evolution is merely the propagation of a species because life has no higher purpose or meaning, then why do we even have sex anymore? Because we can artificially inseminate people? And the answer is, we don't have sex anymore. Why do we still believe in that? Do you know what the national averages are in the United States for sexual frequency between husband and wife in a marriage? Anyone want to venture a guess? How often do people have sex? Twice a week? Yeah, if they're on a Viagra drip, maybe, yeah. And the national average is once a week. Sounds like a lot, 52 times a week. That's a year, that's not bad. Until you read on, that once a week lasts for 7.5 minutes at a time. That includes all the time he spends begging. And by the way, the last time I speak in Canada often, thank God, I love Canadians, even though I'm an American. It happens. He's got a chuckle out of that. And the last time I was here and I told these Canadian men that the average American husband has sex with his wife once a week, and they looked at me and said, once a week? My God, who are these American men? Superman? They're all nymphomaniacs, oh my God! So why do we still believe in sex? In fact, and I wish Richard were here so he could respond, I recall very distinctly that he said in one of our debates at Oxford that he doesn't really believe in love, and most evolutionary biologists don't either. Look, God can't be seen, felt, touched, heard. Neither can love. No one has ever seen love. You've only ever experienced it. And even that, an evolutionary biologist would tell you, is delusional. Love is a trick played on the mind in order to ensure that you have sex and propagate the species. Thank God the delusion has now been dealt away with. We can have sex well without it. Oh yeah! And yet Richard Dawkins never attacked the institution of marriage, even though it doesn't seem to be very true. By the way, one final point on this, because it's important. To show you how far apart the sexes have traveled, I'm going to conduct a very short experiment. This is a question to the women and the women only. Raise your hand, and listen carefully, because it's a precise question. Raise your hand if you need a man. Now, before you do so, I'm not asking you to raise your hand if you can stomach a man. Less so am I asking you to raise your hand if you can survive a man. The question is, raise your hand if you need a man. 1, 1.5, because there's someone raising their hand like this. I mean, the way some of these hands are going up, you'd think I'd say, I asked, raise your hand if you have a venereal disease. Rabbi Shmuley, I have this disease. It's called a man, and I don't know how I got it. And I don't know how to get rid of it. Now, to all the women, we had one hand that went up. Raise your hand to the women again if you need a refrigerator. And why is that? Because GE brings good things to life, right? By the way, I'd like to be fair and ask the men if they need a woman, but when you ask a man a question, raise your hand if you need a woman, what he hears is, raise your hand if you want sex right now. And the question does not work. But Richard Dawkins didn't attack marriage, sex, human relationships, the family either. Even though it's not true. Our nature doesn't seem to be programmed for monogamy. And it doesn't work anymore. It's only religion that bothers him, which is curious. I wonder why. I've always wondered that in all of our debates. In this book that I published when I was a rabbi at Oxford, there's a lot of material. And I was reading it. I was